Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing great. In this short Python tutorial, I want to show how to create a simple pivot table with pandas in Python. So to start with, I just want to show you the pandas pivot table function. So we have here the pandas.pivot table function with all the different arguments within the brackets here. First of all, we are going to define the data. This is just the data set we are going to use for the pivot table. Second, we define the values. These are just the numbers we want to have within the pivot table. Next, we define the index, and these are just the rows of the pivot table. And then we define the columns, so just the columns of the pivot table. Next, we have here the aggregate function, and the default here is just the mean. So if we don't specify that, the underlying function of the values within the pivot table is just the mean. Then we also have the argument fill value. We can use it to replace NA values in the pivot table. Next, we have margins, and here we can actually sum all of the rows and columns within the pivot table. We can also give that a name with the margins underline name. And then there is also dropna, which just drops NA values for the function. Okay, so first of all, we are going to import the packages. We are going to import pandas as PD. This is for the pandas data frame and also for the pivot table. Then we import numpy as np. We use numpy for the NA value. And then the first step, just to illustrate an example, I create a simple pandas data frame, the f, which just contains different dates, different IDs, and different ratings. So we have on each day, we have different IDs with different ratings. And as you can see here, I have one NA value within the data. So the first step would be to make a pivot table just with the ratings for each day. So as you can see here, we use the pandas.pivot table of the data frame, which is just the data, and then we define the columns here as dates and the values as the ratings from above. So these are just the rating columns, and here actually we compute the mean just because this is the default. When we compare up here, the aggfunc is just defined default as the mean. So this pivot table just gives us the mean ratings on each day, as you can see here. When you want to have the dates as index, then you can just define the index as the dates, and then you have the dates as index here with a column of the mean ratings here, which is just the exact same as above, just the other way around. When we now want to define a specific function, for example the sum, we can specify the aggfunc as sum within here, and we sum up all the values of the ratings on each day. When we want to sum all the ratings for each ID, then we can do that by just using the ID as the columns or the index, and we just specify the rest of the pivot table function as above, and then we just get the sum of the ratings of each ID for the whole period. When we want to do the same thing with 2 dimensions, then we specify, for example, the columns as ID. So we have here all the different IDs, and then we also specify the index as the date, and then we have all the dates as index here, and we use the sum. So we have for each ID, we get the sum on each day. There might also be the case that we want to use multiple functions. For example, we want the mean and the sum within one pivot table, and now we actually get 2 pivot tables. So we have here the mean for the IDs on each day, and the second part is just the sum of each ID on each date. And as you can see here, these tables are the same, only here the values differ because here we actually have 2 observations for ID 1 on that specific date. Okay, and now we still have some NA values values within the pivot table, we can actually fill them with the fill value equals 0. So we want to fill them with a 0. So you see here, we fill this NA with 0 within the pivot table. Okay, and the last thing I want to show is the margins. And if we define that equals true, then we get an additional column and an additional row with the mean or the sum over all the different IDs and dates. And as you can see here, I just defined the margins name as total, and actually here we have the total over all IDs on specific dates here. So if this short video on how to create pivot tables in Pandas helped, please comment below, like and subscribe. Thanks a lot and see you next time.